It's the Larry Kudlow Show. Free market prosperity starts here. Now, here's Larry Kudlow.
Hello, folks. I'm Larry Kudlow. Great to be with you today. By the way, you can live stream us over the internet. LarryKudlowShow.com, LarryKudlowShow.com. Running all across the country, around the world, throughout the solar system, including the Milky Way. And join us during the week, please. Fox Business, fabulous Fox Business Network. The name of the show is Kudlow, 4 to 5 p.m., every day, Monday through Friday. And if you can't get us at 4, please text your favorite 9-year-old, and she will show you how to DVR the show. And you'd be most welcome. So, I guess you know what the headline's going to be. I'll just phrase it, Comrade Kamala, her economic plan will never work. Really insane plan. I guess we should have seen it coming because she hinted at it a couple of days ago, her speech in North Carolina. I would just say this, price controls and a government takeover of the economy never works. Okay? It will never work. It never has worked, and it's not going to work now. I don't care who you are, whether you're Joseph Stalin or Fidel Castro or Nicolas Maduro or Richard Nixon or now Kamala Harris, price controls and big government socialism, it's not going to work. You will get a stagnant economy chock full of inflation. It's as though she's repeating the mistakes of the past with her own spin on it. And it really sets up a clear fight between her big government socialism and Mr. Trump's free enterprise capitalism. She's going to stagnate the economy, maybe throw it into recession. Mr. Trump would rejuvenate the economy. His is growth, growth, growth. Hers is punish, 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 government, government, government. And it's interesting how badly it was received. I mean, Democrat economists are attacking her. The Washington Post is attacking her. The New York Times is attacking her. And I want to add to this. I mean, I know the headline is these price controls. I want to get to that in a minute because you can't do that. It never works. But inside the plan is about $2 trillion worth of new spending and deficits. It is exactly what the doctor did not order. The Biden administration has been running $2 trillion deficits as far as the eye could see. This would increase that substantially. And all this deficit spending, which was the problem in the first place, going back to the so-called American Relief Bill of March 2021, and right through the misnamed Inflation Reduction Act of August 2022, where Kamala Harris cast the deciding vote as president of the Senate and gave us the 20% increase in consumer prices, 20% jump in groceries, 40-some-odd percent in electricity and energy, and I can go down the list. You've heard this before. This just repeats those mistakes. There's no spending restraint. There's no deficit cutting. Now, she thinks she'll raise taxes by $4 or $5 trillion. Oh, we're going to tax rich people. We're going to tax rich corporations. Well, first of all, it's the middle class that pays the bulk of the taxes, not the rich. And by the way, she'll throw the economy into a deep recession, which is what Mr. Biden did, by the way, in the first half of 2022. 2 straight quarters of negative GDP. She's got $1 trillion worth of child credits, new child credits, and newborn credits, and $25,000 mortgage subsidies. By the way, $25,000 mortgage subsidies for new home buyers would just mean everybody who sells a house will raise it by $25,000. That's how markets equilibrate. And on and on and on through various health care, Obamacare, earned income tax credits, debt cancellation for health care. Of course, student loan debt cancellations also, which the Supreme Court has ruled unconstitutional. That's not even in this calculation. It should be. But the headline is federal ban on price gouging on food and groceries. Price gouging. It's just price controls dressed up as price controls. It's like Churchill said of Attlee. It's a sheep in sheep's clothing. I mean, price controls, really? We don't really know, by the way. And this is so interesting to me. Joe Biden, Kamala Harris have been talking about price gouging for basically 3.5 years. They have this misconception that high prices cause inflation. In fact, it's the other way around. Inflation causes high prices for everything, not just groceries and food, everything across the board. 20% increase. It's the biggest in 40 years. And it's caused by too much money chasing too few goods. And the value of your dollars in your pocketbooks and wallets goes down. So stop spending all this money. But they won't. They're going to spend more money, and they think they're going to cover it with high taxes. Not going to happen. And I don't know what price gouging is. Do you? I mean, I know price controls will eventually lead to shortages of food. And then, of course, the controls are lifted and prices explode. That's what happened to Richard Nixon. I hate to say it, but that's what happened. Nixon's price controls were a complete disaster. Complete disaster. And once they were lifted after a year, 9 months, whatever, inflation soared. And he put price controls on various wages and energy and all kinds of things, food, and then pumped up the money supply and got 15% of CPI, which eventually destroyed his presidency. Nixon was so unpopular. Yeah, I know all about Watergate. I get that. But it was high in inflation, deep recession that slammed, ended his popularity. It's kind of what they're going to do, what Kamala would like to do right now. And no one's ever proven something called price gouging. We don't know what it is. It's never been defined. She says yesterday the Federal Trade Commission, run by this left-wing progressive Lena Khan, who's lost every court case on mergers and acquisitions, all the court, and they've never found any examples of price gouging. Not one. The San Francisco Fed did a study, and I guess the St. Louis Fed did a study and said there's no such thing. It hasn't happened. Business prices have gone up the same as consumer prices. And again, rising prices don't cause inflation. Inflation causes rising prices. Deficit spending and easy money from the Fed. That's what causes inflation, and that's what causes all prices to rise. I mean, some might rise a little faster than others, but they're all rising. Excess profits, corporate greed. I did a little homework, put a pencil to this. She's attacking, Kamala's attacking grocers. So I looked at what are the profit margins. I was trying to think, how do you define price gouging? Well, maybe it's because they're making too much money, right? Corporate greed is her favorite left-wing slogan. So I looked at grocers, Kroger, Albertsons, Walmart, Costco. Their profit margins were a tiny 1.2%. That's all. The whole economy, every business in America, the profit margins come to 8.5%. The grocers segment, 1.2%. And you can look at beef and poultry and meat companies, 4.7%. Again, very low, half of what the total is. By the way, you want to see some big profit margins. In the tech sector, Apple, 25%, Facebook, Microsoft, 34%, NVIDIA, 53%. The techies have huge profit margins. She's not accusing them of price gouging. I'm not accusing them of price gouging. I think the whole thing is just nonsense. It's phony. She's trying to say to voters, I'm going to do something about inflation. No, you're not. This has nothing to do with inflation. What this has to do with is left-wing nostrums that business is bad. That's all. Business is bad. And the Federal Trade Commission is far left, Lena Khan. Oh, my gosh. In general, look through her economic plan. I know you're probably not going to read it, but I'll just tell you, it's all about government. Government this, government that. Down payments for home buyers. Big child tax credit. We have a child tax credit, and Trump's tax plan was doubled from $1,000 to $2,000. That's adequate. And we also raised the standard deduction, doubled that. That's adequate. But the Democrats just want to pour it on. Mr. Biden tried this. He couldn't quite get it through. Kamala's doing the same thing. Spending a couple of $1 trillion. And by the way, all this deficit spending will raise interest rates. So home mortgage rates are going to stay high. And the youngsters, Gen Z, young people, they will not be able to achieve the American dream of buying a home. Home prices are record high. It's good if you own a home. I get that. It's good. But if you're trying to buy a home, it's not so good. And, of course, she attacks the Trump tax cuts with a pack of untruths. All the usual Biden-Harris nonsense. I'm going to come back to that, attacking the Trump tax cuts and the Trump plan. The Wall Street Journal editorial, the Wall Street Journal on the whole, the editorial page, not a big fan of Donald Trump, but they're defending Trumponomics. And what am I going to call it? Kamalanomics. Kamalanomics not going to work. We had Kamalaflation. Now we move into Kamalanomics. I had to think twice there. All I'll say is she's done two things here, two big decisions, both left-wing. One is to hire this guy, Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota. He's a big left-wing progressive. The second one is to announce her so-called economic plan. Big left-wing progressive plan. Big, far-left progressive plan. Big government socialism at its worst. So she cannot sell herself as a centrist or a moderate. The public looks at that stuff and knows that she is a sheep in sheep's clothing. She can flip-flop as much as she wants. It won't sell. I'm going to take a quick break. I'm Kudlow. More on this stuff right after the break.
This is the Larry Kudlow Show. Now, back to the Larry Kudlow Show.
So we're back to Comrade Kamala and this crazy plan of hers, price fixing, government control of the economy, big government socialism. So she found time in her speech yesterday, once she got through with price fixing and price caps, she went after, of course, the Trump tax cuts. And it was interesting to me, the Wall Street Journal editorial page, which, as I said, is not a big fan of Mr. Trump, but is defending the Trump tax cuts. And they wrote a very good editorial about it. And some of the points they make, inflation was practically nil during the Trump years. Prices rose during Biden, Kamala, 20%. They only went up 7.8% during the Trump years. And actually, Trump's was 1.9 at an annual rate. Obama's about 6% at an annual rate. Inflation-adjusted average weekly earnings down 3.9% under Biden-Harris. That's typical families. Working folks down 3.9%. Increases 2.6% during Trump's 3 years. That's a spread of almost 7 percentage points. In other words, paychecks have been falling under Biden, whereas they rose under Trump. Poverty rates fell under Trump. They've gone up under Biden. Minority unemployment dropped to record lows under Trump. They've gone up under Biden. Middle and lower income wage earners were this is important, the Trump tax cuts, both the corporate and the individual tax cuts, the biggest gainers, study after study has shown this, even though the Democrats continue to lie about it. The biggest gainers were middle and lower income wage earners, not the rich. And by the way, the rich bellyached. Rich Democrats in the East Coast and West Coast, because Trump cut back sharply on the state and local tax deduction, SALT. Remember? He cut it back to $10,000, and rich people screamed, "Ah! Ah! You cut back," because all that was doing was letting the governors in New York and New Jersey and Illinois and California jack up taxes, income tax rates, so wealthy people could deduct it from their federal. Trump stopped that. I hope he ends it altogether. It was the middle and lower income that did the best because they had more job opportunities, and profitable companies after tax paid out higher wages and bonuses. And then she accuses Trump of getting rid of Obamacare. That's not what he wants. He's leaving Obamacare alone. What he did do in the 2017 tax cut bill was he repealed the highly unpopular individual mandate. So I'll just say this. Government central planning, big government socialism, it's not going to work. Trump wants you to keep more of what you earn in a competitive free enterprise economy. She's recession. Trump is growth. I'm betting on the growth guy, folks. We'll be right back.
From Wall Street to the White House, this is the Larry Kudlow Show.
Welcome back, folks. We're going to talk about the politics of this plan, this Comrade Kamala plan. We're going to bring in Joe Concha, Fox News contributor, and his new book is Progressively Worse. Boy, progressively worse is the truth. It gets worse and worse. You're so right. Why today's Democrats ain't your daddy's donkey? No, Joe. I think you should rename it. It gets progressively worse, folks. It's fantastic. And we've got Ned Ryan, president of American Majority and Voter Gravity, and his new book coming out next month, American Leviathan, The Birth of the Administrative State and Progressive Authoritarianism. You know, Joe, remember on the show, on the TV show, you were saying she had one big decision. This is before the bombing speech yesterday, but she had one big decision. She chose this left-wing progressive guy from Minnesota, Ted Walz, that's his name, Governor Walz. But now, Joe, she's had a second major decision, and she's chosen a far-left, essentially big government socialist, Comrade Kamala plan. So I would, take it from there, because her claim to be a centrist, I don't care what her flip-flopping is, the two big decisions show she's a far lefty. That's it. And I think the country sees that with clarity.
Larry, it shows that she is a horrible candidate. This is amateur hour. I mean, the first major mistake, selecting Tampon Tim. I mean, that couldn't have been good. How do you vet this person, not know about the stolen valor, not know, oh, yeah, let Minnesota burn to the ground, and obviously tampons in elementary school boys' rooms. That was like as far left a candidate as she possibly could have chosen for a state that hasn't gone red since 1972, so he doesn't deliver that. And there you had just Josh Shapiro sitting out there. It's Josh Shapiro sitting out there at 65% approval in the state where anybody you talk to says whoever wins Pennsylvania is going to win this election. And that certainly would have gone a long way in helping her do that by picking a popular governor in a state she needs, and instead she goes with Walz. And now her first major economic speech. And you're talking about, and you talked about it on the air extensively on Fox. They had you all over the place after this came out, and rightly so. All you have to do is just look at the precedent in Venezuela, in Cuba, in the old Soviet Union.
And Nixon.
For that matter. Yeah,
Nixon.
Exactly.
Hey, let's not forget Richard Nixon.
Don't forget about me.
We're bipartisan here. Nixonomics.
Yeah.
Here, the Wall Street Journal editorial this morning, Kamala Harris endorses Nixonomics.
Nixonomics. Well, you know what? No, it's not. All right, I expect that from the Wall Street Journal. What I'm not expecting is CNN is killing this proposal. And when you've lost CNN, you've lost the argument. Harris's plan, quote, Harrison's plan to stop price gouging could create more problems than it solves. Right? So at Washington Post even, we saw that a great editorial where they said, if you want to stop being called a communist, maybe don't propose communist ideas. I'm paraphrasing, but so this thing's getting killed everywhere. And again, it just shows she thinks that we're living in a far left country, and we are not. It is center, right of center. And if she just ran to the center, faked it like Barack Obama did, she'd be in a much better position. But trust me, when polls come out in like a week or two and this really starts to settle in, I think you'll see that this was a decisive momentum changer, that speech yesterday.
Yeah, I think I think she's peaked already. I've seen a bunch of polling numbers that suggest that. Ned Ryan, I want to Catherine Rampell, whose father and mother are good friends of mine. Catherine doesn't like me; she hates Donald Trump, but she came out against it. But the Washington Post editorial board came out against it.
Right.
I didn't think that was possible that they would come out against some progressive idea, but they have, citing the high cost of groceries, housing, and even $5.29 Big Macs. While the inflation rate has cooled, the Biden administration prices remain elevated relative to the Trump years, blah, blah, blah. I mean, you lose them, that's it. I think somebody told me yesterday the New York Times editorial came out. I didn't see that yet. But in any case, pretty much everybody's coming out against it, Ned.
Yeah, no, and because they realize how absurd and ridiculous we have all kinds of empirical evidence that, for a moment there, Larry, I did have hope when she said she was going to address price gauging.
Yeah.
And hope that she wasn't going to actually address price
And the
gouging.
crowd still applauded?
Yes, wildly.
That was the best part of, you don't even know what she's saying. But it's it is Soviet-style economics. It's communism. It's failed miserably everywhere. It's led to empty grocery shelves. It's led to bread lines. We see Maduro in Venezuela, I think it was 1,300% inflation on groceries when he did price controls. I thought the other thing that was pretty interesting, Larry, is we just lived something in 2008 called the subprime mortgage crisis, in which it collapsed the world's economic meltdown globally. She proposes a $25,000 first-time down payment for first-time homeowners. Are we going to really redo that again? Why on earth, if somebody needs a $25,000 down payment, would a loan officer look at that person and go, yeah, I think we should approve you for a mortgage? It's like we're setting up another subprime mortgage crisis. But again, everything that she said yesterday was absolutely insane, not only communist-style economics, but we just lived some of this less than 20 years ago, and you're proposing the exact same thing. And I agree with Joe. I think the next wave of polls are going to be pretty brutal. And the thing that I want to remind people on the polls, I think Trump's got to be ahead 4 or 5 points in these battleground states. And I think you might start to see some of that reflected in those numbers in the next few weeks because, the left has a very good ballot harvesting game, and they can finagle 2 or 3 points. What they can't do is finagle 5 or 6.
Well, $25,000 subsidy for first-time home buyer, all that does is raise the price of a home.
Yep.
Right.
So you will get, in other words, home prices across the board will be raised by $25,000. The other point I'd make, it's an economic point, but it'll hit politically, is she is spending about $2 trillion on this. See, that's to some extent the price gouging or price control. By the way, no one knows what price gouging means. No one knows it. I mean, St. Louis Fed has looked at it. The San Francisco Fed has looked at it. They don't know what it means, and they said whatever it means, it's not happening. But the point is, all of her tax credits, she's boosting tax credits for almost everybody under the sun, and the price out by the Committee for Responsible Budget, they're not a supply-side shop. They're kind of in the middle. Maya McGinnis, they're pricing this out as $2 trillion. So there's more deficit spending, which means prices will go up, inflation will go up, and so will interest rates, Joe. That's the thing. There's no – if you want to deal with the inflation problem, you've got to cut spending and deficits. You must, and they won't. And all she wants to do is raise taxes across the board. It's not going to fly. People see right through it.
Yeah, that worked out well for Walter Mondale, right, when you run on raising taxes. And the whole thing about this is it repeats a pattern that the Biden-Harris administration has shown. Because remember what they did with student loan forgiveness, right, when 87% of Americans don't have one dime of student loan debt, so they have to pay for the 13% who took out the loan but now don't have to pay it back. What is the ultimate result of doing that? Colleges only will raise their tuition for children in the future that eventually attend there as young adults, because they know that the government's just going to bail out these people and give them money to pay for the tuition anyway. So that's the real problem. And it's the same thing with this. So I swear this is complete and total amateur hour from the vice president, and now it really puts that focus back on that debate on ABC again. And I am holding out hope, and maybe Ned's not with me on this one, but if they chose George Stephanopoulos, then I would not have any hope that there wouldn't be any real bias in this and even some questions being shared in advance. But I think David Muir, he's kind of like the Gavin Newsom of evening news. Like, you don't hear about him in terms of bias all that much. He's more on the fluffier side, I guess, for lack of a better term. And I could see him doing what Tapper and Bash did, where if anybody wants to accuse ABC News of bias, he's going to prove that, nope, we're going to ask some good, fair questions. And I just hope he goes the Tim Russert route, where he reads back Kamala Harris's own words on XYZ and then watch this person, who is the Ron Burgundy of presidential candidates. In other words, if you put it in the teleprompter, Kamala will read it. And without that teleprompter, when she has to explain why it's a good idea to go ahead with price gouging, or what Ned mentioned before as far as the $25,000 for a down payment given what happened in September of 2008, I don't think she has the ability to explain it, and it's going to be like Joe Biden in Atlanta all over again without the dementia.
Price gauging.
Gauging, excuse me. I always get that wrong.
Price gauging. The teleprompter revolted. I mean, blame the teleprompter, man. Price gauging.
Yeah.
Ned, are you old enough to remember Richard Nixon's whole story? My first job many years ago, 1973, in the aftermath, but Nixon's price controls in 71, the worst of it was lifted, but they had price guidelines, quote unquote. They had different forms of wage and price controls right through the 1970s, Nixon, Ford, and Carter. And it wasn't until Reagan came along that he abolished all of them, and particularly in the oil price controls and gasoline price controls. And I remember people lined up at gas stations, and by the way, they were shooting each other to get to the gas pump. That's how bad it got. I'm not kidding. There were shootings. And everyone said to her, I was in the assistant director of the Office of Managed Budget in that time, and James Schlesinger, the former energy secretary, who was a friend of mine, the late Jim Schlesinger, he and I, we bet $100. I said, if Reagan removes the controls, prices are going to go down. And he said, if Reagan removes controls, prices are going to go from $40 to $100 for gasoline. Prices collapsed. Oil prices went to $12, $10 a barrel after Reagan removed controls. Now, because that's a fun period, and I want to bring that back because Kamalanomics is going to bring that back into the spotlight.
Yeah, no, I'm barely old enough to remember the gas lines, Larry. I definitely remember. Was born and raised in Southern California, and I remember this was late '70s, early '80s. It was late '70s, sitting in line waiting in gas lines. But can we address also the fact of her price gouging doesn't address the fundamental issues of some of the reasons that grocery prices are through the roof. And again, I would remind people when they talk about the gouging that's taking place, I think grocery stores have like a 1.2 to 1.8% profit margin. So the reason the prices have gone up, obviously they're inflationary spending, printing up money like it's monopoly money, but it's also their obsession with this global warming hoax and the complete destruction of our own energy supplies. And what they have done is increase the fuel costs, the transportation costs, which have obviously led to higher grocery prices. And so when you talk about some of the things that Trump is going to do, he always talks pretty much in every speech, drill, baby, drill. I mean, there's a lot of different things when you talk about removing price controls, but it's also Trump being very realistic about we have incredible energy resources. We could actually address, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 issues by simply going out and saying we're going to unleash our energy potential. And that not only will obviously deal with transportation costs and the fuel costs and inflation, all those things, but obviously is going to make us stronger economically. And so, yeah, I mean, everything that they're doing, they're saying we brought about this inflation. I mean, she pretty much did a Trump commercial yesterday.
Well, it's a gift.
Up 50%.
And she's given
all
Trump.
Of these things and said,
I'm
going to somehow fix it.
She's given Trump 2 gifts, Joe. One in Minnesota and now one on price controls. 2 gifts. And he'll pick up eventually the deficit spending of $2 trillion. And he himself is doing something he didn't really do back in 2016 or 2020. He's talking about big budget cuts. He's talking about rescinding unspent funds. Now, I don't want to get too in the weeds, but if you obligate or authorize spending, but you do not actually spend it, okay, presidents have the authority to rescind the unspent monies. Now, it has to pass through the House and the Senate, which I think probably going to go Republican. But you can see that she's going to keep on spending. He doesn't want to spend. And I think that's a big issue with the public. They don't like spending. They don't like spending even more than they want lower taxes because they equate spending with inflation quite properly. And I think he'll take advantage of that, Joe.
Yeah, people have home budgets. They know don't spend what you don't have. And if you do, then you're going to be chasing interest for the rest of your life and minimum payments. So I think that's genius because we saw what happened with COVID. And I know you got to go. But COVID, they passed all these trillions in spending, and then they would pass more billions to follow that before the other parts were even spent. So it's just logic. And if Trump runs as the common sense candidate, he's been saying that a lot more lately, and he does what he did yesterday with all those all those items on a table and saying this is what this costs, this is what this costs, and just bring it down to like simple terms like this is what's happened over the last 4 years. Think about what you had with me before the pandemic. And I think when people have that choice, it's a pretty easy decision in those states that matter. I
think so. Common sense is going to prevail. Let's take a quick break. Joe Concha, Fox News contributor, Ned Ryan, American Majority. I'm Kudlow. We'll be right back.
Larry Kudlow. From Wall Street to the White House, this is the Larry Kudlow Show.
Welcome back, folks. We're talking to Joe Concha, Fox News contributor, and his new book is Progressively Worse, Why Today's Democrats Ain't Your Daddy's Donkeys, and Ned Ryan, president of American Majority and Voter Gravity, and his new book out in a couple weeks, American Leviathan, The Birth of the Administrative State and Progressive Authoritarianism. Indeed. Joe Concha, you looking forward to the Democratic National Convention in Chicago?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's going to be like I never visited Gaza, but I think Gaza will be coming to Chicago, right? I went to Panama City and Cancun for my spring breaks. But the point is, I mean, you're going to see more Palestinian flags, Hamas flags outside the United Center, where the Bulls play, the Blackhawks play. It's
you're right about that. It will be like Gaza. I hadn't thought
100,000.
Yeah. Like Gaza meets Hanukkah, because it's going on for basically 7 crazy nights, 8 crazy nights. So it's going to be a mess. And I mean, it's going to be so choreographed, obviously, and a big celebration for Kamala. But in the end, what's going on outside of it's going to make 1968 look like a picnic.
Well, all right, Ned, I go to you on this because 2 things occur to me. One is that outside the convention is going to be a mess. I'm going to get back to that. But inside the convention, they may try to cleanse the speakers list, but they're still going to have the Democratic Party, the Elizabeth Warrens of the world. They're going to speak they're going to speak, and Bernie Sanders and them, and the public is going to hear this big government socialism and progressivism and left-wingism. And I think it's going to be a real problem. I do. People may have temporarily forgotten, with the Kamala hoopla, they may have forgotten what is really inside the Democratic Party. It's all going to. They're all going to speak for 4 days.
Correct. No, I mean, people say this is the farthest left ticket that they've ever put up, and I think that's only partly true. I mean, these are neo-Marxists, both Kamala and Tim Walz. And I think you're going to see some of that ideology on display all week. And it really does, for me, Larry, show that the neo-Marxist socialist takeover of the Democratic Party is complete. They have put two of the furthest left candidates at the top of the ticket. They have shuttled off, Dementia Joe and those that might have quasi-held on to some moderate beliefs off to the side. And they've dropped the masquerade. I think this is the thing that's interesting to me. They needed to Trojan horse their far-left ideals through Joe Biden. They've dropped all pretense now. There's no mask. There's no more masquerade. This is who they are, and I think she made that very clear yesterday, and I think we're going to see that on display all next week. And I think what troubles me is they're not even being shy about it. We have a very, very clear choice now. It's either freedom or, quite frankly, it is communism.
No,
and
it's
I hope that
big government.
I hope the American
socialism.
people make the right decision. Well,
I don't like communism.
Well, the Green New Deal. I just want to make the Green New Deal is coercive socialism.
Yeah, it's big government. Newt calls it big government socialism. Communism, you're talking about expropriating the means of production. They don't do it that way. They do it through the regulatory state nowadays. That's why I thought Newt's label big government socialism is right. And also communism. And I don't like it when Mr. Trump uses communism either. It reminds you of Stalin killing 50 or 70 million people. And I don't, as awful as that was historically, I don't think the present-day Democrats are in that boat. What they're doing is they're just having a government takeover of the economy through the regulatory state or through the tax and spending state. That, I think, is more accurate than straight-up communism. But I digress. I don't want to defend them. I'm just trying to get into what this really is. Joe, let me ask you something. Talking about Gaza outside the convention hall, which I think is a key point, that will be blamed on Kamala Harris, just as, many years ago, the 68 riots were blamed on Hubert Humphrey. That's going to be blamed on her, won't it?
Yeah, there'll be a juxtaposition of Chicago and what it's going to look like, and we're already hearing it's going to be a huge, huge mess, likely some violence, some police may get hurt, all that stuff. And then you put that side by side with Minneapolis or San Francisco, the two cities that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz were made in charge of. And plus, you could be facing some legal problems here as well, because I heard the Karl Marx estate is suing for copyright infringement, guys, and that's big.
That's exactly right. Well, she should have footnoted Trump's no tax on tips. Just a little footnote. Anyway, Joe Concha, thank you. Ned Ryan, thank you.
It's the Larry Kudlow Show. Free market prosperity starts here. Now, here's Larry Kudlow.
Inflation is here to stay. There's no way Kamala Harris is going to get around that. The ghost of inflation will hurt Kamala Harris through the election. That's the latest report by John Carney, economics editor for Breitbart News and co-author of the must-read Breitbart Business Digest. Welcome back, John. This is a very interesting piece. We've been above 2.4% inflation for 40 consecutive months. The last streak of inflation staying that high for that long ended in 1991 and was killed off by a recession. That's an interesting point, by the way. You've had, even though the yearly rate has come down, first of all, inflation has a long tail still affecting people with the 20% cumulative rise. But you're right, inflation's not gone away. It's a hard thing to get rid of. And Kamala Harris was very much a part of the Bidenflation, wasn't she?
That's right. So one of the things when a lot of people are like, well, why are people still so upset about inflation? We've had high inflation. Inflation got higher during right around the financial crisis. We had a little spurt of inflation. But really, we haven't had a burst of inflation that lasted this long for really a generation. So people are feeling a kind of inflation that many people never felt in their entire lives. Other people haven't felt for 30 years. And it's really actually having a big psychological impact. It hasn't gone away. And as you said, Kamala was right there in the center of it. At the heart of what made inflation get so bad and stay so bad were the Biden spending programs, all of which passed only because Kamala Harris's tie-breaking vote on the ironically named Inflation Reduction Act, on the ironically named American Rescue Plan. It should be called the American Ruin Plan because that's what it did to our economy. She cast the tie-breaking vote. It wouldn't have happened. By the way, she didn't have to cast that tie-breaking vote. As vice president, usually the vice president does what the president says, but there's no constitutional mandate for her to vote for Biden's legislation. She did it on her own to pass that legislation. We would not have had as bad inflation as we had without her votes.
And she was proud of it. And you know what? I mean, almost lost in the headline of this price control plans she unleashed yesterday is the $2 trillion price tag on the rest of her speech. That's what you're looking at. Now, the American Rescue Plan was $1.9 trillion, and that launched the inflation that got to 9%. And I might add, 2/4 of negative GDP. The Inflation Reduction Act, misnamed, was a little over $1 trillion. What she said yesterday, John Carney, it was priced out by whatever they're called, the Federal Budget Watchdog Group, Maya McGinnis's group. They're saying it's going to be up to $2 trillion. Actually, what she produced yesterday is a bigger spending plan than the first two that you mentioned that caused the inflation in the first place.
That's right. There's a lot of inflationary stuff, actually, just in what she's proposed. First of all, this $25,000 for new home buyers will only push up the cost of new homes by exactly $25,000 because when you give people more money to spend only on a particular item, it makes that item go up in that price. Also, if her legislation for price controls actually, ironically, may make things go higher, because one of the things that some of the Democratic legislation that is trying to impose this, Elizabeth Warren had a version of this in the past, did was say you're not allowed to give a discount if you're a big food distributor to somebody like Costco. So that's one of the reasons food is cheaper at some of these giant places, Walmart, Costco, because they're buying in bulk, they can buy cheaper than some small places. If you outlaw that, that means people will shop family grills.
Back.
It's actually inflationary.
John, let's look at the economy for a second. The retail sales report early last week was pretty strong. But I want to note that the industrial production report was negative again, and that the new housing starts report was very negative. And I know everybody focuses on consumer spending, but actually the production business side of the economy looks very poor, and housing's been in a recession for quite a while. So how do you read all that?
We could throw in there the Empire State Manufacturing Survey from the New York Fed and the Philly Fed's Manufacturing Survey, also both negative, both saying that contraction regionally that manufacturing is in contraction regionally. So yes, the industrial production number was very bad. Manufacturing is still struggling in the United States, we are really having a sort of two-sided economy. If there was any weakness in the consumer, that's it. We're in a recession. The consumer really is propping up the economy. That consumer number was very strong. I think if I were the Fed, I would be a little worried about that consumer number, because if people are still spending, that was a little inflated. There was a burst in car buying because we had that program of cyber attack where you really couldn't buy cars for a little while in June. And so a lot of that got pushed into July. But still, it was, even if you take that a pretty good number, I think the Fed, the idea that the Fed's going to cut 50 basis points, Oh, yeah, I think that should have erased 50 basis point cuts.
Why is it, though? I mean, I'll be devil's advocate. Why, if the demand side of the economy, a.k.a. consumer spending, is rising much faster than the supply side of the economy, which is the production numbers, and including the housing construction starts and so forth, and, you're still running, the CPI and the PCE deflator are still above the Fed's targets. Why are they in a rush to lower the rate at all? That's all I know Wall Street is kind of talking the Fed into it. Jay Powell will speak next week. I don't know, when does he speak, Friday or Thursday, in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. But why? What's the real logic here?
There really shouldn't be any rush to cut rates at all. I understand they want to cut. Maybe they do one in September. They should definitely not do one in September, another in November, and then another in December. If they want to cut, they should cut and then pause. Let's see what happens to inflation if the Fed starts loosening. Don't just, march on, because as you said, the demand side is still really strong. We shouldn't be, slashing interest rates in the face of that.
Well, that's just something of a mystery to me. Their target is 2. They haven't hit the target yet, as you point out. So if you haven't hit the target, why do you want to lower the rate? I mean,
and history is very scary about this, Larry, because there's a lot of history that shows that inflation, even just last year, inflation came down. It was actually lower than it is right now, and then it went back up. That happens a lot in history where you kind of get head fakes. You think, oh, good, inflation's coming down, and then it roars right back up. They should be very nervous about that happening. If it does, that's a real recipe for inflation to get out of control. If the Fed is cutting and then interest rate and then inflation starts rising again, that'll be a serious problem.
I mean, I don't know, and I have not spoken to him directly about this, but I think Mr. Trump may well say to them, you're goosing the election year economy to help the Democrats because you have a major target. And the economy, it still has some juice on the consumer side. I mean, I think he's going to take a whack at the Fed. He may take a couple of whacks. Lord knows he's done it in the past.
And I guarantee you the Democrats, Kamala Harris, will declare victory. Once the Fed starts cutting, you will hear all of Kamala Harris's proxies say, this is the Fed telling us the inflation crisis is over. You can now vote for Kamala Harris without worrying about inflation. And so Trump will actually, absolutely be right to say that this is giving Harris a boost in her election chances. There's no reason to cut before the election. They should have made it clear, and Jay Powell still could rescue this by making it clear next week at Jackson Hole, we're not cutting in September, we're going to wait till November. Unfortunately, they should have done that weeks ago. The market now is so convinced that that they're going to cut in September that if they don't, and if they signal they won't, you're going to see a big problem. The stocks will crash.
Well, you'll get another 1,000-point drop. But, I mean, I just think it would show some backbone by Jay Powell. Yes. I really do. I saw, what's her name, Bowman. She was the small business person that Trump appointed to the Fed. She said she's the first one to come out and say, don't necessarily think we have to cut rates. And I just think that's interesting. I'd like to see Christopher Waller say the same thing. I mean, cooler heads should prevail right now because nothing is very clear. Inflation's not licked. And, Kamala comes in, spends another $2 trillion in deficit financing with her goofy price gauging stuff. Couldn't read the teleprompter. But anyway, I think this is not good. I think it's the wrong direction.
And look, they don't know the composition of Congress. They don't know who will be in the White House. They could just wait till after the election, figure it out, and then have a better chance of which direction fiscal policy is going, which direction regulation, which direction energy, and then cut with that knowledge or not cut with that knowledge rather than cut in advance of it and then be surprised by what's going to happen after Election Day.
I think you're right. I think that would be the smartest thing to do. You go to Jackson Hole? I don't go to Jackson Hole anymore. I used to go all the time. I spoke there once or twice, but That was when there were Republicans out there. There aren't any Republicans at Jackson Hole anymore. It's all a bunch of left-wingers.
I've only been there when the Fed isn't anywhere near there. You know, the only hike I've ever been in Jackson Hole for is out in the mountains.
Yeah, I know. That's great stuff. So Powell's speech, everybody's going to be speculating this week about Powell's speech. Are there any big econ numbers out this coming week?
So not really. This is going to be a relatively quiet week. People will be very focused on Powell's speech, and then following that, the next jobs number. Because if that jobs number comes in, if the August jobs number comes in hot in September, then I think the Fed will really have to reconsider this plan to cut. And Powell make that very clear, by the way. He can say, look, if the jobs number comes in weak again, maybe we'll cut. But if we're getting hot numbers, do not be as convinced as you are that we are going to cut. He should at least warn the market that, you know, there's no guarantee of a cut, which is what Michelle Baumann was saying. Other Fed people have said they don't think we need to cut till the fourth quarter, which would not be, you know, which would be in the November or December meeting. They shouldn't be allowing the market to get this far ahead of where the Fed has said it is.
And John Carney, last one, so early September, there's a jobs report, and then there'll be one in early October.
That's right.
Right? So there's 2 more jobs reports left. And how many inflation reports? 1?
Yeah, well, you know, we've got one more
CPI. We'll also have another PCE report coming in. I think that actually comes in next week. So we'll get some more information, but the CPI probably isn't going to be anything frightening. I think at this point the jobs number will matter a lot. That they're going to have to pay a lot of attention to that. And frankly, these retail sales numbers they should be watching, because if people still are spending as freely as the retail sales numbers imply, then again, who are you cutting for? Right.
The American people have the money they need to buy the things they need. Why are you cutting now? It looks to me very political.
All right. John Carney, terrific stuff. Economics editor, Breitbart News, and co-author of the Breitbart Business Digest. Thank you, John. Folks, quick break. The other side, Professor Mike Faulkner is going to tell us some more about economic policy and Kamalanomics. I'm Kudlow. We'll be right back.
This is the Larry Kudlow Show. Now, back to the Larry Kudlow Show.
So for more on Kamalanomics, which is the hot topic, we bring in my pal Mike Faulkner, Professor of Finance at University of Maryland, AFPI Chief Economist, former Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. Mike, welcome back. You know, everyone's talking about price gouging and price controls, and we've pretty much beaten that to death last night on the TV and this morning here on the radio. But there's a couple other things. The Wall Street Journal editorial this morning is very interesting. It talks about the $3,600 child tax credit, a bonus to $6,000 for newborn. Over that's going to cost $1.2 trillion over a decade, and they call it. It's right. It's essentially a guaranteed income because the credits can go to people who don't work. And I didn't realize that, or I didn't read the fine print. And a guaranteed income, that is an old left-wing progressive socialist idea, and I guess they're sticking it back into this thing. What do you make of that?
Yeah, that's right, Larry, because they have been trying for decades to get universal basic income, and they put new language around it, and they call it things like refundable child tax credits. But really what it is it's removing work requirements. And so if you look back as to why welfare reform in the 90s was so successful and why we've been able to improve labor force participation and provide an example to children about the benefits of working, the Democrats are looking to take a lot of that away. You know, and you have to wonder sometimes, do they actually want to lift people out of poverty, or do they want people permanently in dependency? Because that's what you do when you remove work requirements. Instead of giving them a step up on the ladder of success, instead it seems to become just this permanent dependency, and that's what a really generous child tax credit that's fully refundable would do.
And that's essentially paying people not to work, to be blunt.
That's right. And there's been some academic work out of the University of Chicago that estimates that had the Biden child tax credit that they temporarily implemented in the American Rescue Plan, had that been made permanent, we would have seen 1.5 to 2 million people fewer working. And at a time that we have labor shortages, at a time that we have millions of job openings that go unmet, why would we want to discourage people from working by giving them essentially a universal basic income?
The one other thing, we're a little pressed for time, but there's a national rent cap here because there are real estate tax breaks, but they're conditioned on rent caps. So this is a new. It's bad enough the cities do this, and some states this is a federal rent cap. Is that possible?
Right. This is what's so discouraging is that there's so much evidence out there that what rent caps do, what rent limitations cause, is housing shortages. And again, we're millions of units short. And the idea that you want to discourage construction and availability of housing just boggles the mind.
Yeah, sorry, we run out of time, Michael Faulkner. You're so great to help us on the TV and the radio. We will talk some more this coming week on the TV show. That was Mike Faulkner. Next up is Charlie Gasparino, famous correspondent.
From Wall Street to the White House, this is the Larry Kudlow Show.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm Larry Kudlow. I don't know, we're trying to get a couple people on the phone. We'll see how we do, but let me continue this discussion. I'm sorry we lost Mike Faulkner because of the time element. But, this Democratic wish list of a guaranteed annual income where you're just paying people not to work, this has a long history in left-wing progressive politics and economics, but it's really a killer to the economy. And by the same token, I know Mr. Trump has raised the issue of taxing seniors on their Social Security benefits and taxing seniors who continue to work, like me, for example, and taxing them heavily on that income as well. I mean, if you really, my marginal tax rate on some of the earnings I make, including Social Security benefits, can be as high as 65%, including state and local. But, I mean, we should not be rewarding people with government subsidies or refundable tax credits, which means you just give them cash, no matter if they have any income or not. We shouldn't do that. I mean, the participation rate, the labor force participation rate, and the employment to population ratios have been sinking for years because of all these welfare-type payments. And it weakens the overall economy. I mean, you want the economy to grow at 3% plus, like it did for 50 years. I mean, just some numbers on this. Bear with me. Between 1947 and the year 2000, the American economy grew at 3.5% per year, and that's after inflation, real growth, 3.5% per year. And there were, 10 or 11 recessions, but the recoveries roared back. Right? That's what a free market economy does. Since 2000, we've grown less than 2% per year. We have had brief respites of that. George W. Bush had some 4% years. Donald Trump had some 4% years as they cut taxes. But on the whole, we continue to pay people not to work, and that slows down the economy. And I think it's very bad politics, and it's very bad economics. So keep your eye on that. All right, fortunately, we found Congressman Kevin McCarthy, former congressman, former Speaker of the House, and good friend. Kevin McCarthy, thanks for coming on a little earlier. We appreciate it very, very much. First of all, here's my question. I had Steve Daines on the TV show last night, Senator Steve Daines of Montana. He's running the Senate Campaign Committee, as you know. He was pretty optimistic, Kevin McCarthy, about picking up several Senate seats. I know we got one in West Virginia. He was pretty optimistic about Montana and Ohio and Nevada and Pennsylvania. What does Speaker Kevin McCarthy think about that?
Well, first, thanks for having me on. I love watching you and listening to you because it's an education I think all America needs to hear.
Thanks, Kevin.
But I tell you, working with you, the people don't realize your sacrifice for the contribution you've given to this country. So thank you, Larry, for what you have done in the economics. But, Steve Gaines has done an excellent job. First thing to do, you got to recruit. I've been through this job. I know what it takes. And first of all, he got somebody to retire in West Virginia. So that's a pickup. He only needs one more seat to capture the majority. Now, we know you got to get to 60 to really have the Senate. But you get to 51, you get to confirmations. You get reconciliation. We keep the House. I'm optimistic, too, in the Senate. I believe the Republicans have the majority in the Senate. The Senate is just the map itself. It's not everybody up. I'm optimistic in the House. Now, the last two cycles I know have been tough for Republicans, but not in the House. I'm fortunate to be one of the few leaders, I don't know if I may be the only one, that I've never lost seats. I've always won seats, even down times when we lost the White House, lost the Senate, lost the government. We still won. And I think it's easier to win seats in the House this cycle than the last two cycles. And let me tell you why, Larry. We had redistricting in North Carolina. So not only are we guaranteed to pick up 3, it's kind of like West Virginia. The Democrat members didn't even run again. We could pick up 4 in North Carolina. Plotkin, who we almost beat in Michigan, is now running for Senate. Tom Barrett going to pick up that seat. We got another one. Paul Young, who came close last time. The Democrat now retired. He's ahead in that seat. You look in Pennsylvania, the last cycle, we had a bad Republican candidate at the top of the ticket for governor, and it cost us. But I see 2 to 3 seats in Pennsylvania, and McCormick is the best candidate we could have at the top of the ticket. He's going to do a great job there. I look at Alaska, where 60% of the voters vote Republican, but they got this ranked system. They're going to have their primary coming up next week. We got the lieutenant governor. I think we straighten it out there. The thing that no one really pays attention to, when Pelosi became speaker and I became minority leader, in those 2 cycles, we've only won in California. We picked up 5 more seats in California. We've got 2 more to go. Now, I've been on the road. I was in Florida doing events. I was down doing at Ken Calvert. I was at the old Richard Nixon house in San Clemente. We were doing an event. What a great history there, where that's where Kissinger was asked to become Secretary of State in the swimming pool with Nixon. That's where Brezhnev came as leader of the Soviet Union, and Ronald Reagan was with him with President Nixon. But, then we also have picked me up in Ohio. I think we got a great chance to win that Senate. But we had a bad candidate in the last cycle to this Democrat there. We're going to pick up that seat. We're ahead. I see a lot of opportunities.
Bouncing back to Montana, Steve Daines, senator from Montana, saintly wife and I were married in Montana. She's from Montana. But you got this Sheehy running against John Tester. Sheehy's a decorated military veteran, so is his wife for that matter, and a good businessman. I don't know. Tester's trying to flip-flop his way back to the middle, but, he votes for all the Biden stuff. I think we got a shot at Montana.
Well, Montana's the whole election for the Senate because we have West Virginia. They need 1 seat. Montana's our best opportunity, but it's also not a gimme.
Right.
You watch Tester.
Yep.
You saw him in Washington play that liberal Democrat when he would hold up an appointment for President Trump, but he played back home like he's working with them when we knew he was not. We watched him in committee vote with the Democrats every single time, but play he's something else back home. He's a liberal Democrat. But Tim Sheehy, if you had to sit back and say, who would I like to be a statesman? Who would I want to represent? Well, I want someone that knows leadership that's been in the military. But think about being in the type of that he served, the Navy SEAL and others. But I want somebody to know economics, right? Larry Kudlow, that's going to be one of the most important things you're going to want, right? Just to understand that. But as a businessman, he wasn't just worked for somebody. He created something. So when you create a business, an entrepreneur, at age 20 was the first company I ever created. And I never created a big company, but it's a small deli. And there's 3 lessons I learned, Larry. the first to work, the last to leave, and the last to be paid. And I will tell you, that was the best MBA, better than the MBA I got later, of understanding from regulations, from paying taxes, from what something costs in sales and marketing, everything wrapped up into one. Well, he did it very successful. Now, he could have easily gone, done his time, and go retire with his wife. But that's not, because they got that servant heart. They believe in something bigger than themselves. And just to put yourself on the line to even run for office, knowing they're going to say things about you that aren't true, that you're going to have to stand up and make a battle for the nation, this guy is remarkable. And that's why I am so optimistic about Republicans winning, because of the type of candidate that Steve Daines actually helped recruit.
He's done a good job. So, former Speaker McCarthy, how's our friend Donald Trump doing? What do you think? Is he back on message?
I think he is getting there. I've watched him, and you got to understand, you've watched what he's gone through, and I can't imagine any other person. And I've never seen, and you've been around politics a little longer than I, in the history of America, in the last 10 weeks, how much has changed. Right? Week after week. It's just barely been a little more than a month where he was almost killed. Think about going through that. Think about putting the entire justice system against him just to try to make him not run. Have to go through a primary where people are all running, but make the case. It makes you stronger. And then a sitting president, and you did so well in a debate that he decided not to run, and they select somebody that's never even gone through a political process, and it's a new race. But look, Kamala Harris is not ahead. I believe this entire race hinges with Pennsylvania and Georgia. I still talk to the president on a very regular basis, and I've watched how, and you've seen him so many times when we'd be in the Oval Office and others, he understands what the American public's going through. He understands what regulation means, but he understands the struggle. And I've never seen somebody work as hard as him and with sacrifice. But you see the damage in the last 4 years. Inflation is the greatest damage any country can do to their citizens, because it harms every single person, but it harms those who are the weakest and trying to get up, and it happens every day in the grocery store. He's watched from the energy to unshackle the benefit that God has given America, but it's not just what's given America. It makes the world a safer place, but it makes it from environmentally sound. Like if we just replace American natural gas with Russian natural gas in Europe to our allies, in 1 year, we lower CO2 emissions by 218 million tons, right? And he just actually brings out the best in the people and the economy.
I think I thought his interview with Elon Musk, which a lot of people listen to, and I also, Kevin McCarthy, I thought his speech in Asheville, North Carolina, it had a lot of good economic content. It really was, kind of 95% content, 5% some other things. But, he is who he is, and he's going to do what he's going to do. I'm not trying to change the guy. But,
to entertain a little.
I know. And so I don't, it doesn't bother me, and it bothers some people, whatever. But the point is, strong economic content, borders, fires overseas. I thought the press conference he had, all right, he maybe went on a little long, but still, he's standing up, right? No teleprompter, hardly any notes at all for like 90 minutes. I mean, very few politicians can do that, and neither Joe Biden nor Kamala Harris can do that. And Trump did it. And I think people look at that and they go, hey, this guy knows something, warts and all, he's got a sense of humor. He's from Queens, New York, but he knows stuff, and he just spits it out. So I was impressed. I thought it was a pretty good week for him.
I think he's been turning things around.
Yeah.
Look, I don't think he's going on getting every single cylinder just right, but you're in the middle of the Democrats going to have the convention. So I think he's doing it right. And look, it's not the way you and I would do it, but we probably couldn't win president. I think a little of that personality is fabulous. But I keep talking to him. 3 major factors, and he knows it. I said, have 3 debates with her. Have one about the economy. and just show it. She's the deciding factor that brought us inflation. She isn't just she wasn't the senator and one of the many who voted for it. She was the president of the Senate that broke the tie that brought us inflation.
Yeah.
Do one on the border. We know there's no one better on the border.
Kevin, can you hang on? I don't mean to interrupt.
Yes.
You're on a roll. Can you just hang on? Let me take commercial break, and then you come back after the break.
Hey, that's how you pay for it and make money always.
You got a couple more minutes. I know you're on a roll. It's a great insight. Hang on. Just hang on. We're going to take a quick commercial break. Folks, we're talking to former Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. He's a great friend from California, and you can hear his optimism. I'm Kudlow. We'll be right back with Mr. McCarthy.
Larry Kudlow. Now, back to the Larry Kudlow Show.
We are talking some more with former Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy of California. Kevin, thank you for waiting around. I wanted to ask you, with all this swirling around, and you saw Kamala's awful economic program yesterday, now we go into the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. And two things. One is there's going to be a lot of problems outside the hall with these demonstrators, but there also, I think, going to be problems inside the hall, no matter how much they try to cleanse the party. You're going to get a lot of speakers who are, well, shall we say, lefty progressives. I was going to say crazy people, but just let's say, very far left progressives. The Elizabeth Warren types, the Bernie Sanders types, they're going to give their vision of the world. And I don't think viewers are much going to like that vision. But what are you expecting for this big convention?
Well, a couple things you're going to see. The Democrats are going to be relieved they don't have Joe Biden. And that's going to mask over. Okay, that's going to be the makeup over everything else. But the thing that's going to be the misnomer, they're going to act happy because they don't have him. And the reason why they're happy, because he wasn't just losing, he was cratering so much. They were guaranteed to lose everything with astronomical numbers. So they're happy that's not there. But they're not going to be overly excited that it's Kamala. They're going to act like they are, but they're going to be like the schoolgirls. They're going to be mean girls in there. Because remember, she's never gone through one primary to become president of the United States. So you're going to have the jealousy of the others. You hit it right on the head, Larry. You're right. The progressives in this party, the socialist progressive wing, is continuing to take over the Democratic Party. And then they've got their own internal fights for Gaza and everything else. So they're going to act like they're happy, but they're all going to be fighting to say they should have been the person. If you didn't have to go through a primary and earn something, it's just like anything else in life, right? When you listen to her, you would think you're in Venezuela. You would think you're back in time in the Soviet Union. That you're going to put price controls on food. You're creating bread lines, right? I mean, it's the thought behind it. So they're going to think she didn't earn it. Well, if nobody earns it, I should do it because my far left opinion is better than hers. But this is the unique thing. No matter how socialist you think that voice is, from whatever anybody says, remember this: Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, anything else. Kamala Harris was the most liberal member of the Senate while you had Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. But I think behind the scenes, behind the curtain, you're going to see a lot of bickering in the back.
Well, and I think a lot of these people, look, I don't know how they're going to cleanse the speakers list, but even, take Bernie Sanders, take Elizabeth Warren. These are not people that the public wants to be leaders, presidents. They're extremists. They may win their states. Okay, that's the way it works. Far blue states, deep blue states. But they're still out there. They're still out there. And I think that's a problem. And then outside the hall, Kevin McCarthy, I think they're going to have a big – if all these crazy groups show up and they're protesting and whatnot, that's a problem, and that's going to be on her. It's going to be on Kamala. No matter what she says, it's going to be on her. And in other words, I think people are telling me that she's going to peak in the next week after the convention. I don't know. The convention may not help her one bit.
No, I don't see it helping a lot. It's kind of like her picking of Tim Walz. How much does that help?
Yeah,
right. It's only held her back.
Right.
And every time she dwells into policy, does that help her? No, she drops a little further. Look, for all your listeners, think of this. the press is going to spin everything they can for her. They spin like the polls are great. She's not in the lead. And they think like it's hurt President Trump. His numbers have actually gone up in the polls they say that is so great for her. Remember this. When Joe Biden won, he only won by 48,918 votes, and his favorability was plus 10. When Hillary Clinton lost, she has better polling than Kamala Harris today. Joe Biden had better polling than Kamala Harris today. But let me give you something else. Donald Trump has better polling today than when he beat Hillary Clinton.
Right.
Okay?
Yep.
And when it was 48,918 votes, there's going to be greater protesters than that. Everything is in Democrats' head is this 1968 and we're back in Chicago and we're fighting among ourselves and it's about a war in another country. That is, they're going to try to mask over that and they're going to try to put her up. And the first time she finally has to, after this convention, answer a question without a teleprompter, she will stumble. Yeah. And this is that, okay, we're all on President Trump, but this guy, less than a month ago, he almost was assassinated, right? Then the person he'd been running against for the last 6 years pulls out. So was he not 100%? But he's going to get there, and it's going to be stronger, and she's going to get weaker. And we're going to peak in November.
Former Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, thank you ever so much for your wisdom. We really, really appreciate it. Folks, I'm going to take a quick break. On the other side of the break, we're going to do some stock market work.
It's the Larry Kudlow Show. Free market prosperity starts here. Now, here's Larry Kudlow.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm Larry Kudlow. So you can live stream us on the internet for this show, LarryKudlowShow.com, LarryKudlowShow.com. And during the week, please, you can listen to us on fabulous Fox Business Network television. Name of the show, Kudlow, 4 to 5 p.m. every day, Monday through Friday. And if you can't get there at 4, well, please text your favorite 9-year-old, and she will show you how to DVR the show. All right? Okay. Special guest here, my good friend Charlie Gasparino, Fox Business senior correspondent. He's the best business reporter in the country, folks. He's a New York Post columnist, and he's got a new book out, Go Woke, Go Broke, the inside story of the radicalization of corporate America. Right on, Charlie. Yeah. So ESG, okay, and if that weren't bad enough, DEI, but it looks like the companies that went there are paying a price for it.
Well, you know, Larry, I figured no one else in mainstream media would write this story because they're too afraid and they're too locked in and they're too woke. And, you know, I mean, and you see this every day playing out in, you know, just right before us in this presidential campaign, how they're covering it. So I figured I had to go there. I mean, there was something that went on in this in the corporate ecosystem, which you and I have been covering. You were an economist for Bear Stearns. You understood Wall Street from the ground up, and a commentator on it. I've been a longtime business journalist, and I saw the transformation. How we went from guys like Ace Greenberg and Jimmy Kane running companies based on metrics and you know, making money, to this thing where, you know, Larry Fink and Jamie Dimon are, you know, running our stakeholders, are part of the stakeholder capitalism movement. And I wanted to trace how we got there because, you know, the end result is not good. I mean, it's not good to go to work and have HR departments proselytize white men employees as if they're racist, to have physicians denied to a coal miner's daughter over, you know, some dude from South America because of strict DEI standards. It's not good to have oil companies being forced to not drill for oil, you know, when we have inflation and higher gas prices because of ESG, environmental social governance mandates. This is just not good. I mean, it's not good for shareholders. And, you know, we all knew it was not good. And then something happened, which, again, no one wanted to cover, but something happened in 2022, 2023. There was literally a revolt of the normies on this stuff, the revolt of the masses. And it forced every company that went there to do an about-face, and whether it's Disney, whether it's Larry Fink's BlackRock. And Larry Fink is a guy I like and admire in many ways. He built a great business, and he had the you-know-whats to sit down and talk to me about it. So you got to give him credit for that. And he's backed off it. He understands where he went too far. But it's not just him. It's Disney. It's Target. It's Budweiser. You know, the messaging that these companies did, they got their what's handed to them from the American consumer, and now they're backing off. And someone needed to chronicle it. Now it's not totally over. These companies are still pretty woke, but the fight is on, and there is a sort of cultural counter-revolution to corporate wokeness. And wokeness in general. One question I have, Larry, and maybe you can answer this. Wokeness does not sell on these, broadly to the American public. I mean, listen, you can virtue signal while you eat ice cream. So I guess Ben and Jerry's is a perfect example, right? Right? But it's an ice cream brand. These broad national brands. Disney, which is very woke, and I go into all the ways it was. Its stock price hasn't moved since 2014. Let's be clear here. So the question is, if this is a loser with the American public on a consumer level, will the most woke presidential candidate, even more woke than Barack Obama, her name is Kamala Harris, and Tim Walz, who's very woke and they're not bashful about it. Kamala Harris has been quoted as saying we need to be more woke. Can they sell it to the American people? Will they buy this in this election? I think
it's going to be hard. I don't think they can.
I agree with you.
I mean, you saw yesterday, Charlie, what you got so she comes out with this economic plan with price controls and spending $2 trillion in more deficit spending. Strange things happening, like the Washington Post editorial board has come out against her. People on CNN have come out against her. Former Obama economists have come out against her.
Well, I just can't imagine. This is what's baffling about her. She probably, this is why if Trump can't win this, there's some issues here.
Yes.
He literally had the best potential VP candidate in America right there, and it was Josh Shapiro, particularly if you're a Democrat. I mean, he's moderate, he's good, he's good looking, good on the stump. I've studied him, he's smart, he's got 60% approval rating, but she didn't go for it. We can only guess, because he's Jewish, and that annoys the Hamas wing of the Democratic Party. So she screws up there, and she goes with this guy Waltz, who they didn't even vet. I mean, you read, he's like an open sore. I mean, every day is another story about him. Then instead of kind of giving like a middle of the road speech how she might be different than than Biden, she basically starts channeling Hugo Chavez with price control. Yeah. How could you make this up?
I don't.
And if Trump can't win this election, Larry, I don't know. The only thing I can say, the only positive thing, I hate to be self-centered, is that Kamala Harris is going to help me sell books because she's so woke. And I talk about just how bad it is and how stupid it is. It is actually stupid if you think about it, right?
Let me ask you something, though, last minute or so. It looks like the tide has turned. I mean, the Budweiser beer ad was really something. And
I get into that a lot.
Their sales just crashed. And you're right about Disney. And Larry Fink is backing off climate change and ESG. So is that going? Is it going to continue? Jamie Dimon, for example, to me, unbelievable that the head of J.P. Morgan would go woke on us. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense at all.
Well, let me give you a Jamie Dimon example in the few seconds we have left. Jamie Dimon, did a $36 billion racial equity fund that no one knows where the money's going, because I checked, right? This is during the George Floyd thing where everybody went really woke. He was filmed taking a knee.
Yes.
Picture taking a knee when he visited a bank branch in Mount Kisco. At the time, we all asked, "Why are you taking it? Is this like are you channeling Black Lives Matter here?" And they were like, "Well, write what you want." They essentially confirmed it, right? So when I went back and fact-checked the book, they said, "Yeah, one thing about that knee question you keep asking, Jamie is not in favor of Black Lives Matter. He was taking a knee to fit into the picture. He didn't want to obstruct the." And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" 4 years later, it took that. Right. It took
wow.
So they are backing off. It's a loser.
Right.
I just, and by the way, it's still in there. What I find fascinating, Larry, is that no mainstream journals would cover this hysteria.
Well, that's because you're the best business reporter in the country, and you always have been, and you're not afraid. And anyway, you're an old pal of mine, so Terrific stuff. Folks, you've been listening to Charlie Gasparino, Fox Business senior correspondent. You can read him in the New York Post. And anyway, the book is Go Woke, Go Broke, the inside story of the radicalization of corporate America. Please go out and get it. That's the least you can do. Thank you, Charlie. Quick break coming up. On the other side, we're going to do some stock market work. I'm Kudlow.
This is the Larry Kudlow Show. Now, back to the Larry Kudlow Show. Now, it's time for Protecting Your Investments, sponsored by Colonial Metals Group. Here's Larry Kudlow.
Hello, folks. I'm Larry Kudlow. This is Protecting Your Investments, sponsored by Colonial Metals Group. And our two stars who are going to protect your investment, Jim LeCamp, Senior Vice President at Morgan Stanley, and Jim Urio, Director of TJM Institutional Services. Sorry, kids, thank you for your patience today, but the stock market, Dow is up 1,162 points, NASDAQ 886, S&P 500 210. And I just want to add into that, the price of gold closed the week at 2,509. So, what me worry? Everything's going up, Jim Urio. Everything's going up. We're levitating. What's going on?
No, everything's not going up. The dollar's still going down, and everything that's denominated in dollars appears to be going up. The Fed is going to ease. I think they'll only go 25 basis points. I'm not sure. I actually do think they should. I think the labor market is much worse than it's being portrayed to us. So for the last year and a half, I've believed in things like gold, silver, Bitcoin, real estate, and stocks to a certain extent. I thought there would be a wicked stock correction that would force the Fed off the sidelines. It wasn't as wicked as I thought. I thought it wasn't over yet, but now it appears to be. If we see some strength on Monday, particularly in the S&Ps above that 55.50 level, I will think that the recent horror of our 8% correction is done and stocks going higher too. But I don't think it's all a good thing. I think that what they're saying is the economy might be crumbling and the Fed is going to be quick to the rescue like they've been in the past.
Well, it's funny. I would say to you the Fed should not cut the rate because we haven't hit the 2% inflation target. And even though industrial production is falling and housing is falling, consumers on the demand side are still strong. And I think the Fed should wait. And I think Jay Powell should say they're going to wait until after the election. I'll probably be wrong, Jim LeCamp, but that's what I think. What do you think about that?
If you look at the chart of inflation in the late 70s, you had lots of little head fakes that inflation was getting better, but it wasn't. And Paul Volcker, in an election year, which we're in again now, cut rates in, 79, and the next thing you know, inflation did rear its ugly head again. And in the early 80s, Ronald Reagan, first 2 years of Ronald Reagan, I don't need to tell you this, Larry, but the first 2 years of Ronald Reagan, inflation spiked up to its highest levels ever. And look, the economy. I agree with Jim Urio that the economy is weaker than we think, and the jobs market is weaker than we think as well. In fact, the retail sales numbers yesterday, a lot of that big surprise gain was due to a revision of the previous months downward, which is a neat little trick these statisticians have been doing with the jobs market also all year. And consumer spending is, while it might be okay, consumer savings have pretty much been drained, and inflation is still biting. Let's not forget the inflation rate at, call it 2.5 if you want to. You hear politicians saying, especially in the Biden administration, saying that inflation is coming down. It's not coming down. It's still going higher. So these higher prices that we're all having to deal with, whether it's at McDonald's or buying a house, the higher prices have not gone away, and wages have simply not kept up. So this is still a very tight economy. That said, I think it would be premature to cut rates here, but I think they will. I think they'll do 1/4 point in September.
Jim Urio, what about commodities? There's I looked at the CRB futures. There's a pretty big correction the last, 3 months, maybe 4 months. But they're really still at a high level and well above where they were a year ago. And I just wonder what those commodity signals may mean.
I think the broader commodities, I mentioned gold and silver before. The precious is a totally different thing because that's a dollar hedge. The rest of the commodities, I think, are flashing what I said too, and that the economy is slowing quite a bit. Goldman just came out with a piece over the last couple of days saying they expect revisions at the next unemployment report to be down 600,000 of the previous month's revisions. Now, I didn't get too deep into the article, but that to me is alarming. So to me, like again,
600,000 for the month?
I don't think it's for the month. I think it was for like 2 months. I'd have to read the piece.
Even 2 months. Even 2 months.
Out there. The piece is out there. But anyway, so the point is that I think those jobs have been overstated. I know we joked last time I was on, I was talking about second and third job side hustles compared to career full-time jobs. And the things are completely switched. This is not a particularly productive economy, and I think things are showing right now. And I think commodities are reflecting global slowdowns. I think gold and not silver yet. Gold is reflecting what should be poor stewardship of our currency in the next 6 months when things start to hit the fan and the Fed has to put it into overdrive.
I think I'm doing a side hustle. I mean, I'm a
you're the king of side hustles.
I'm a Fox newscaster, and I do this radio things like a side hustle. That's where the big bucks are. Well, not exactly, but it's kind of fun to speculate. What's Jim LeCamp down there in Texas? What's doing with oil? Oil's been soft for quite a while, despite the Middle East and all that. Oil prices have come down. What do you make of it?
Well, I don't think we have to worry about that, and I don't think we have to worry about prices because Kamala Harris is going to put price controls for us. Yeah. So everything's good. Why aren't we listening to the Bee Gees, by the way? I need to buy some bell-bottoms because it looks like we're returning to the failed policies of the 70s. Now, let's get to oil. If she wins, look for oil to go to 125 at least. She's talking about trying to kill fracking, et cetera. And oil's really interesting here, Larry. And if you look at the oil stocks, they're starting to base again. And I think the resources play, I'm glad you brought it up. I think the resources play is where we really need to be looking, not necessarily right now, because if you enter into a recession, which I think is very, very possible, they'll probably trade off first. But then I think we need to load up because the policies, the spending, and what we've got going on geopolitically all point to resources being back in favor, not to mention the dollar. And if she wins and we install new money printing programs and giant boondoggle programs, it's going to be bad for the dollar as well. I like the resources play. I like oil and gas in here. The rig count is way down over the last year. If you talk to people in the patch, which I do every day, if you talk to people in the patch, they'll tell you, look, we've been able to kind of frack our way into keeping supply going to a degree, but these are not our highest quality wells anymore. And with the rig count down, the depletion's going to kick in, and pretty soon you are going to be seeing higher prices no matter what happens in the economy.
Last 45 seconds, Jim Uriel, what happens to interest rates? Not the Fed funds rate, but the 5- and 10-year notes, for example. They've all come off. Are they going to go down or are they going to go up?
I think rates are going higher over the next 6 months. If you look at the last probably 8 longer-term Treasury bond auctions, at least half, including the last 2, have gone poorly, indicating to me that the demand is not quite there. I think that as they start to shift out the curve to issue bonds, it's going to get worse and worse. I could easily see a 5.5% to 6% 10-year within the next year. But
Jim LeCamp, Senior VP at Morgan Stanley. Jim Uriel, TJM Institutional Services. I'm Kudlow. It's a side hustle. Money and politics next.
From Wall Street to the White House, this is the Larry Kudlow Show.
So we're going to talk some money and politics now. Liz Peek, Fox News contributor, syndicated columnist. Steve Moore, Committee to Unleash Prosperity Hotline, WABC radio host of More Money, playing right after this show on many of these same radio stations. Liz Peek, you ever met Hugo Chavez, Nicolas Maduro, or Richard Nixon? Maybe you met Richard Nixon. They all had one thing in common, price controls. And they had a second thing in common. It was a disaster. I'm just thinking, I know you get around, Liz. I just thought you'd share this with us.
Yeah. Sorry to say, no, I'm not in touch with those particular august representatives of socialist economic policy. But I got to say, I am really stunned that in this era, with so much on the table known about such experiments, that anyone would sort of roll out price controls as a feasible idea. I think it's the most extraordinary thing. And you know, Larry, this is the first real substantive thing we've heard from Kamala Harris other than picking Tim Walz. And you got to say, they're in the same basket, right? I mean, these are two indications that Kamala Harris would govern, if president, as an absolute far-out lefty, if not socialist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Steve Moore, you're a big proponent of price controls. And by the way, besides price controls, which are doomed to fail, and I don't even know what price gouging means. I mean, I don't understand any of this nonsense.
Wait, Larry, hold on a second. It's price gauging, not price gouging.
I know.
Yeah,
well,
there you go.
She had an argument with her teleprompter. I get it.
The price gauging.
But also, don't forget, in this little package of goodies is $2 trillion of deficit spending, which puts her actually, she cast a tie-breaking vote for the American Relief Plan in 21. That was only 1.9. And then the tie-breaking vote for the misnamed Inflation Reduction Act in 2022. That was about $1 trillion, maybe $1 trillion plus. This is the biggest one yet, $2 trillion. Exactly what we need, Steve Moore?
Well, what's that $2 trillion? I know that there is a huge amount of money they want to pour into the housing sector. Is that the main?
No, well, the biggest one is the $3,600 child tax credit.
Oh, and the credit, yeah. Exactly.
And then there's another bonus. And yes, and then the housing money.
More free money.
And they're tax
$1,000, isn't it, for the first newborn tax credit?
How much did you say?
$6,000.
$6,000, exactly right. And with no work requirements. No work requirements.
I know, right?
Okay? So this is very important. They're paying people not to work. Very important, Steve Moore.
So a couple of reactions to all this. By the way, I was teasing our good friend Arthur Laffer about price controls because he worked for Richard Nixon. Remember?
He was there. He was there in 1971. Absolutely.
71. And, you know, actually, it's so funny because I went back and read that declaration that I remember I was 11 years old and my parents and I were watching TV, back when they had 3 networks. And I remember they broke from that and Nixon was giving this speech and he was talking about how nobody was going to be able to raise their prices and nobody was going to be able to change their wage or salary. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, gee, this is pretty crazy stuff. And I was only 11 years old. And of course, that policy was a complete flop, as you know, Larry. And by the way, Laffer, just a little piece of history here. Laffer says there was Arthur Burns, who was the big supporter of that policy.
No, I think it was John Connolly, Governor Connolly.
Okay. Anyway. Yeah, I remember John Connolly. I didn't know whether he was Treasury Secretary or what was he?
Yeah, he became Treasury Secretary. Yeah.
Anyway, the reason I bring that up is, we tried it, Kamala, and it didn't work at all. What happened is, as soon as the 6 months were up, guess what? Every company, massively raised their prices, and we're right back where we were. I think that it's been a bad week for Kamala Harris. After a couple of good weeks, she has really, I think, that you guys nailed it. She has kind of exposed herself as an economic ignoramus. She doesn't understand anything about the economy because only someone who doesn't even understand the concept of supply and demand would endorse these ideas. Incidentally, my good friend E.J. Antoni had a good chart we put in the hotline that showed producer prices, Larry, are up exactly the same amount as consumer prices. So there is no price gouging.
No, we ran that. Actually, price margins for grocers,
2%.
2%.
Yeah.
And
I don't know how they stay in business, frankly, with the 2% margin.
And profit margins for beef and poultry was 4.7. The economy overall, 8.5. Yeah. So they're way below the economy wide. Tech companies Apple.
They have nice profit margins.
35%. Yeah. How's that?
Right.
Nvidia's 55%. So why isn't she going after, go after Nvidia? The reason is this is just food. They're trying to go. Here, Liz, okay, there's a misconception. What Kamala Harris is saying is prices rising cause inflation. I would suggest that inflation causes prices to rise. Now, you tell me, there's a right and a wrong here. You got to help me out on this.
So it's interesting, I think, that even the Washington Post, which heaven knows is a fan of everything Democratic, says it has a headline, "The Times demands serious economic ideas, Harris supplies gimmicks." And they go on to talk about what is price gouging, who in the world's going to determine that. And, of course, someone tweeted this out and said, Jeff Bezos does own Whole Foods. Maybe he's not too excited about price controls on groceries.
Wow,
right?
That's fascinating. Oh, I love that. Love that.
But the reality is, and I mean, I actually, being a former Wall Street analyst, which is, to my credit or whatever, maybe not, I went back and looked at the gross margins on a whole bunch of companies, food producers, wholesale grocers, everybody. They have it. Yes, they went down when inflation hit because the cost of everything went up, and then they raised prices. But most of them aren't even back to where they were because raising prices as much as they would have needed to on groceries, 28%, consumers begin to push back, and they have. So instead of letting the marketplace take care of this, which is happening now, even as we speak, the idea of coming in and putting the heavy hand of government in this is terrible. And by the way, on the real estate stuff, can we just have a moment of remembering what happened in 2007 and 8, which was one of the biggest financial collapses in our country's history, brought on by the government throwing lots of money into, guess what, real estate, right? So that how anyone could revisit that catastrophe and not understand that really hands off, folks. The real estate problem is there. By the way, last comment, Kamala Harris is stealing constantly from Donald Trump. In this speech that she made, she talks about cutting regulations, cutting red tape, allowing things to be built. Golly, where have we heard that before? Obviously, in California, the biggest backlog of would-be property development in the country and the biggest homelessness problem. What is the problem in California? Regulations that don't allow anyone to build anything. So maybe she should have started there. Maybe California should start to address this problem. I think it will get addressed eventually, but this is not going to happen at the federal level.
By the way, Steve Moore, and also inside this whole package, you're looking at essentially universal guaranteed income.
Yep.
That's what all these tax credits are not tax cuts. Right. Tax credits are merely spending.
They're payments.
They're payments through the tax code. They have nothing to do with lower marginal tax rates. They are welfare. But, she's moving the ball closer towards a universal guaranteed income, and you don't have to work to get it. Now, I can't think of anything worse for the morale of the economy, but also for the lousy participation rates in the economy and for, low stagnant growth. That's what this is. There's no growth in this. There's not one scintilla of growth in this plan.
No, it's anti-growth. In fact, she wants to raise rates on everybody and then give out candy to people with these credits. And you're right, no work requirements attached to these. We already have a record. We have about 4 million people that should be and could be working that aren't working. Largely as a result of the vast expansion of the welfare state, which really began under Obama and then obviously increased when Biden came into office. On the housing thing, I just wanted to add something to what Liz was saying. Trump has a natural comeback on this, and he should just say, look, Kamala, when I was in office, the interest rates on a mortgage were 3 to 3.5%. Now the mortgage rate is 7%. So you've got to get inflation under control. You've got to get our spending under control. And, I still think that the most important thing for Washington to do right now is just cut a lot of spending, hopefully at least $1 trillion. If you do that, interest rates will fall, inflation will fall, and you'll see, look, the average, I just looked up these numbers, Larry. the average mortgage payment on a median income house is now almost double what it was when Trump was in office.
I don't doubt that, but she's spending $2 trillion. I wouldn't say that's cutting spending.
Exactly.
All right. I mean, it's interesting that gets lost in the, horror over a return to price controls or price gouging, but this shouldn't get lost. Very important. She's just like Joe Biden, only worse. This would be the biggest spending, bigger than the American Relief Act, bigger than the misnamed Inflation Reduction Act. That's what she's got cooking here. This is not good. And one other point. At Trump's press conference in Bedminster, he had a little section in there how he intends to rescind unnecessary and unspent spending programs. Rescission.
Good idea.
Yes. This goes back. Do you know there's still COVID money that's not spent?
Yeah.
And there's American Relief Act money that's not spent, and there's inflation. And most of the Inflation Reduction stuff was not spent because people couldn't make the DEI requirements, and there were no permits, no permitting reforms. I mean, it's really wild. He's going to cut spending. I mean, that's a newbie.
Interesting. I think that the country would love to hear that, because that is the kind of common sense idea that Donald Trump ran on in 2016. Those kinds of practical solutions really are appealing, Larry, and it really highlights his background as a businessman. I mean, I remember all the talk about, I think it was the embassy being rebuilt in London, I guess it was London, and how, or maybe it was in Israel, excuse me, and how they wanted to do it for, $4 billion, and he came up with a plan for $150,000. And people love that story. And I'm obviously completely mixing up the numbers, but the essence of it was these people are idiots. All they do is talk about huge numbers, huge government involvements. I can do things simpler and smarter. And boy, would recapturing some of that giant excess of spending make a lot of sense. Well, and I think that's a huge win.
Rescissions are a very powerful tool. Now, you need a Republican House and Senate to get them, but rescissions are a powerful tool. I mean, we used it way back in the Reagan years. But one of the best things David Stockman ever did was to go after these rescissions and cut back enormously on the overspending of Jimmy Carter. And you can go for impoundment authority, but you might get into legal trouble. There's no legal trouble with rescissions, and there's probably $1 trillion that has been obligated but not spent. And I think that's great. Meanwhile, on the other hand, Kamala wants to add $2 trillion. So, you got a problem here. Prices rising causes inflation, or inflation causes prices to rise. That's the second problem. Identities, definitions are important. I don't think she gets it. Teleprompter didn't say that inflation causes prices to rise. She didn't, so she doesn't understand it. I got to stop. That's very serious business. I got to stop. All right, kids, you'll come right back, folks. Liz Peek, Steve Moore, I'm Kudlow. We'll be right back with Rescission Authority.
Larry Kudlow. From Wall Street to the White House, this is the Larry Kudlow Show.
We're talking to Liz Peek, Fox News contributor, and Steve Moore, WABC radio host of More Money, coming up after this show on many of these same stations. Liz Peek, you got your hotel reservation for Chicago next week?
No, I think I'd have to take body armor to go to Chicago.
Yep.
I really kicked myself for not going to the GOP convention. It was so upbeat, and it was such a wonderful time for the party, and a lot of really great speakers and everything. I honestly not sure I could do the Democrat convention. The whole essence of it is going to be, look at our shiny new toy, Kamala Harris, who, God says tried, has been in the White House for 3.5 years, has done absolutely nothing, has not received a single vote in order to make her the Democratic candidate. And the entire deception of the American people about the capability of Joe Biden and the attractiveness of Kamala Harris as a candidate, it really is bothersome to me, Larry. I just don't know there's ever been a time when major political figures have been so extraordinarily dishonest with the American people. It really rankles.
The Ritz-Carlton has rooms left. It's got Lake Michigan view. I mean, it's really a fabulous place.
Listen, Larry, the last time I had a friend stay at the Ritz-Carlton, this is absolute true story, they were advised when going shopping at Saks Fifth Avenue not to carry their parcels home for fear they would be robbed between there and the Ritz-Carlton.
You know, once upon a time, I mean, we had a big Bear Stearns office in Chicago. I'd go out there 5 or 6 times a year, the Four Seasons, the Ritz-Carlton. You walk out of the hotel, Steve Moore, and that North Michigan shopping area used to be one of the finest in the entire country. I mean, it was so beautiful.
It's the Miracle Mile,
The Miracle Mile. But people tell me it's deteriorated now. I haven't been there in a while. Have you been back there?
Yeah, well, I'm from Chicago, and I think Chicago is one of the greatest cities in the world. I think it's one of the 10 greatest cities, but it's been completely ruined by progressive policies. And I practically grew up in Wrigley Field. For goodness sakes. But you still have it's the most incredible, beautiful skyline. I mean, it's a great, great city in so many ways. But the politicians have ruined it. And you're right. You can't walk down Michigan Avenue now, which was really, truly the Miracle Mile with incredible shops and restaurants and beautiful views of the lake. And, I think you were only half kidding, Liz, when you said wear body armor because people are being shot at night.
The murder rate is unbelievable. And nobody cares.
Here's the other thing about this, Liz. The murders are happening in Black and Hispanic neighborhoods. They're the victims of these soft on crime policies. I'll give you an amazing statistic, Larry. The population of Chicago today is less than it was in 1920.
Oh, my God.
Leaving the city.
Is it still over 1 million?
Oh, yeah.
Got to be a couple million.
Well, I don't remember the exact number, but that just shows you that, and a lot of the migration has been just in the last 5 or 6 years. So, hate to see that. The one other quick thing. I remember 1968, Larry. I remember I was 8 years old. I was living in Chicago, and what the disorder and the mayhem that was going on outside of the McCormick Place. And I wonder if that's going to happen again because apparently there are going to be 100,000, as many as 100,000 protesters. So we'll see what happens on the streets.
Liz, that's going to be on Kamala, no matter what she says. And I also want to raise a point. Not only the outside, if there's protesting and if it turns violent, but inside the hall, they may try to cleanse some speakers. But they're still going to show you a cavalcade of the liberal left progressive Democratic Party. The Elizabeth Warrens and the Bernie Sanders and all their acolytes and the union guys, they're going to force themselves to speak, and the public's going to see this stuff. And I'm telling you, price controls and Kamala's speech yesterday is going to look mild to some of the things you're going to hear next week. Yeah. That's my take anyway. Your thought?
I think you're totally right, and that's one reason I would have a very hard time sitting through it. I mean, it's so profoundly wrong. They're so dishonest. But it is remarkable that the progressive wing of the Democratic Party is basically running the United States and has been doing that for the last 3.5 years. I challenge anyone who can come up with a city or state run by that element of our political body which is succeeding. The answer is it is not. They are not succeeding. Their policies fail, and it's the poor, dumb taxpayer who funds all this stuff and basically has nothing in return, not good education, not safe streets, or anything else. So who is it that they're pleasing? That's what I wonder.
Steve Moore, are you a Cubs fan?
I am, and I know we're running out of time. One quick thing. When I was growing up, you remember who the mayor was? It was Mayor Daley.
Mayor Daley.
Sure. And
he ran a good city, though.
He did.
He did. He ran a good city.
If you got pulled over, you slipped the cop a $20 bill and you rode away. It was the city that works. People were on the take, no question about it, but it was the city that works. Now it's the city that doesn't work. And that's a little microcosm of what's happened to the Democratic Party. Now they're just incompetent.
By the way, his sons were pretty good, too, moderate Democrat. They're always sort of the conservative wing of the Democratic Party. Anyway, you two are great. Liz Peek, thank you. Steve Moore, thank you. Folks, I'm Kudlow, and I'm hoping to be around next weekend, even after the Chicago convention.